So I'll call the meeting to order. Sandy, would you call the roll?
Johanna Herget. Here. Matthew Williams.
Here.
Frank Neuer.
Here.
Linda Pope.
He's here.
Hiding. Heather O'Donnell.
Here.
Bianca Dennis. Here. Teresa Thompson.
Here.
Call now.
Linda Pope.
Here.
All right, you stand for the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any agenda changes? Okay. All right, so we have the spotlight on programs, the 8th grade writing collaboration. Do you want to say anything?
I don't think I can say anything, but I will let Ms. Shelby do that.
Hi, good evening. Good evening. Thank you for inviting us to present tonight. This is an exciting project. It's our first year that we've participated in it. We've worked with a local author, Mr. Wallace, for many years, and it's been a delight, and this was a nice addition. I don't want to take anything away from what the students and teachers are going to tell you, but thank you so much for coming out. Thank you to Ms. Denman, Ms. Sullivan, Mr. Wallace for leading our students through this exciting thing, and I'll let them speak. Yes, shine and source tonight.
Hi everybody, I'm Nikki Sullivan, 8th grade English teacher. So for many years, maybe 12 or so, minus the pandemic years, Joseph Wallace has graciously visited with our 8th grade students who have read his novel, Diamond Ruby. Pre-COVID, we discussed expanding his working relationship with our district to include a creative writing initiative, but then, of course, the pandemic put all of that on pause. So finally this year we were able to put everything in place. So it began in October with Mr. Wallace visiting the 8th grade English classes to introduce himself and talk about writing in general. And from there, the 8th graders were allowed to explore writing on any topic in any genre and format that they chose. They had the option of sharing their work with Mr. Wallace electronically and or meeting with him individually or in small groups during 2 subsequent visits that he made to our school. They were able to get advice on everything from their initial idea to their final tweaks. And then in November, their final pieces were reviewed by Mr. Wallace and a panel of judges that he assembled, and 8 pieces were selected to be honored.
After we were finished working, we sought feedback from our students in the form of a survey, and the statistics were very clear. 92% of students enjoyed working on a creative piece that they got to choose, which is just a little bit higher than when we assign paragraphs and essays. 57% of our students chose to work with Mr. Wallace either in person or electronically, but another 28% said they would have worked with him if they could go back and choose differently after it was over. Showing that the students really did value the process and getting feedback from someone else and having that expand. So as the local contest in our time was wrapping up, we offered students the opportunity to enter the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards for the Hudson to Housatonic region. Only 19 of our students chose to proceed in entering that, but 5 of those 19 were recognized with honorable mentions or a Silver Key Award, and that was out of over 2,200 total entries. We hope that this year's great success will lead to more young writers taking advantage of this opportunity in future years. So Mr. Wallace, could you come up?
Of course. It's always a funny situation. This is my first year here, but I've done contests like this for about a dozen years down. I live about an hour down in Croton on Hudson now, but lived in Pleasantville and have run contests there for many years. And this part is, I feel like I could spend all my time thanking people for having me in, because I'm this like author who sort of swoops in. I'm not direct. My kids went through the Pleasantville school system, but they didn't go through the one here. So I could spend all my time thanking people. So let me start quickly before I get to the important part to thank you for welcoming me in. The teachers and you know, they gave me the opportunity, and then most of all the students. I mean, totally by coincidence, today I kicked off the contest I run in the 8th grade in Pleasantville. So I spent this afternoon speaking to students, the equivalent of the very first time I came in and getting a lot of. And what I said to them, and what is the most important thing for me to share now, is that I always start by saying, I don't know any of you. I know some of you consider yourself to be writers, but I know a lot of you don't. Like even by 8th grade, you kind of know who the writers are in the grade and who aren't, even though I don't think you should know that yet. But the truth is that what I say is we're not looking for, I welcome the ones who feel like they're writers, but we're looking for storytellers. And everybody in this world is a storyteller. You probably right now are sitting there saying, if you would be quiet, I could tell a story. And so the goal is to get, since everyone has stories to tell, to get them to tell their stories in whatever format they want for this contest, and to have 115 entries, and they were so extraordinarily varied. It was just one of the most fulfilling and sort of wonderful experiences. They were great, and not just the ones who were here tonight or the ones who won. It was a pure joy, and to me that makes all of this one of the highlights of my year. So thank you again, and thank you for doing the work you did. What I'll do now is call up. There was not complete overlap between those celebrated in our contest and those recognized in the Scholastic Awards. And so I'll start with the ones who are here for this contest and then add that. And I hope you'll step down here to get your... I won't talk about the individual pieces because I'm already taking up too much of your time. I'll just tell you that it was everything from poems to essays to stories. You will probably be able to tell by the titles that I'll read out loud that some of them were humorous and some of them were very serious. And I got surprised 115 times as I read them. So starting, I think these are alphabetical, but the first is Leah Bessio for Until She Breaks. And then, not everybody's here, but I'll read everybody's name. Francesca Chula for The Big Game. Hudson Powell for, as I said, you can kind of, Hudson and I did a lot of talking during my office hours. And I knew the minute we selected this piece that I was going to be, oh, you're going to have to read the title out loud when you do the celebration. So here we go. The Reckless Rat Battle of Ridiculous Running and Roughhousing on Runthorne Road. And then there was a really lovely piece by Celinda Rodriguez, who I guess is not here. But I loved the piece she did because she created a world. That's one of the prompts we give, and just to hear the worlds that several of the students sort of chose, it wouldn't even necessarily the ones they would rather live in. It was just their pure imagination coming out, and that was one of them. And then there's Abigail Spillhouse. No, I looked around for Earth, and then Layla Tranter for not here either, for My Stink Bug Crisis. I laughed so hard at that piece. And then Julia Tremblay for When I Was Younger. And then Nadia Zorina for Second Side of Life, one of those creations of the world. Right, I know they'll get it. And then, for the Scholastic Awards, which very quickly they've been going on since I was old enough to submit, but I didn't know about them at the time. People like, Ernest Hemingway and so many Sylvia Plath, so many famous writers did it. And so it's a kind of a different way to sort of celebrate and know that you're works are being read on a bigger stage. And so it's not, I never require, but I urge students to try it because you feel a slightly different sense about things when you do it. And so I was incredibly proud of them for taking that leap, and so many of them getting celebrated. So Leah won. Francesca did as well. As did Anya. For The Way the World Ended, short story. As did Zachary Braffett King. And Julia, John Wafer, when I was younger as well. Congratulations to all of you, and thank you again.
Well,
Sure.
They wanted something they wanted to. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Here. They want to hear.
Okay, I'll go first. So my name is Tessa Chula, and I wrote a short story called The Big Game. Joe Wallace helped me throughout the process of making my short story. He encouraged me to write whatever I wanted and was supportive about all my ideas, even if they were bad ones. Working him with it was a pleasure, and I would definitely do it again.
My name is Julia Tremblay, and I wrote a story titled When I Was Younger. I enjoyed the experience because I liked having a chance to write something that I wanted and not being told what to write. Working with Mr. Wallace was a great opportunity because it gave me an idea of what it's like to write a story, and I appreciate the help that I received from him and the guidance that I received.
My name is Hudson Powell, and I wrote a story titled The Reckless Rat Battle of Ridiculous Running and Roughhousing on Multiple Road.
See?
I felt excited and surprised when I found out I won. I had spent a lot of time writing this piece, and I was very sad. Working with Mr. Wallace was very interesting because I had never met a real popular author before, and writing this was even more exciting.
My name is Anya Weinstein, and I wrote this short story, The Way the World Ended. I really enjoyed the experience of working with Mr. Wallace because it helped me understand that creativity doesn't have any boundaries and how fun it can be to just write and do whatever you want to. If future 8th grade classes get the honor of working with him, then I definitely recommend it.
Thank you.
If you want to get into.
No, I don't want to get in. I want to go put this on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah.
Tag us.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Congratulations, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Congratulations.
Thank you all for bringing that.
Yeah, thank you for bringing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Just get back home.
I was thinking, yeah, thank you.
So that brings us to the first public comment. We have Allison Easton signed up.
And as always, public speakers, just abide by the guidelines outlined in 6.1.
Hi,
would like you to read them to me. I'm just kidding.
We'll be here for 30 minutes.
Yes, I think most of you know me. I'm Allison Easton from New Paltz. Welcome, Superintendent Bretto, to our district. Yes, you're probably one of the few people I don't know. I'm here tonight to speak in opposition to the school board moving forward with a resolution to provide a 10% tax exemption to volunteer EMS and firefighters. On the face of it, I get it. What's not to like? Dwindling volunteerism for first responders has been on a downward slope for years. I can see it reaching a critical level in our community, in other communities. Taxes are high. The service volunteer first responders provide the community is absolutely invaluable. This seems a great way to provide some measure of thanks to those who help in our greatest time of need. While all that may be true, I still don't support the district moving forward with this resolution. First, like one of your own trustees, I have zero confidence that this will have any impact in actual volunteerism on either of these boards, while also continuing to obscure the way taxes are levied and spent. Second, the proposed law isn't one made of research or thought by our fellow town and village trustees. Rather, it's a political tool being wielded by state officials used to scream, hey, we really care for you, without actually providing the tools or the money to make sustainable systematic changes for villages and towns across New York State. And lastly, while I appreciate first responders, I don't see this as equitable or a fair way of demonstrating my appreciation. And tax policy at the bottom needs to be fair and equitable. I ask you, who are we trying to attract to these positions? And I mean no offense to all the 40 and 50-year-olds at this table, myself included. While I do think that we can serve, I would hope that we are actually trying to target 20 and 30-year-olds to participate, because these are physically demanding volunteer positions. And they also take a lot of time and training and a lot of money to train. And a lot of paid positions actually require younger ages to start, and for those exact reasons. My own 22-year-old can't even conceive of a world where he can afford to buy a house right now. None of these younger volunteers are going to benefit from this. So why would they be inspired to volunteer because of this tax break? My own experience as someone who has served on a PTA board for close to 12 years is volunteerism is on a downward slope. This is not just an EMS firefighting issue. Solutions that address the core issues why people aren't volunteering need to be provided. I also feel that this is one of the many gimmicks provided by our state reps. I don't think it's an accident that what's proposed is a tax reduction on property benefiting those who are older, already property owners, and likely targeting well-respected people in our community. It's a great way for the state to avoid doing something meaningful in tax reform. Allow them to get credit for attempting to solve a problem, regardless of whether they actually solve it or not. And everyone can feel good about it. This is business as usual in our state. Everyone knows taxes suck. This has to make things better. However, just like the IVAs and tax cuts, this comes at the expense of local taxpayers. Of course, we love firefighters and our EMS personnel. It's by no accident that these benefits will go to the oldest, most experienced, who most likely will wield enough power to be friends with those who do. But please explain to me how this encourages younger people to volunteer when they can't even afford a house in our community. Or why it's important to give more money to people who have bigger, more valuable homes, which is what a 10% tax increase does, in order to encourage others to volunteer. What about volunteers that can't afford to buy? Most importantly, I ask you to continue to support sensible, equitable tax policy. If we just keep giving tax breaks to all the people we like as a community, are we really for equity? I ask who's next, or maybe who's left in the end to pay the taxes. My opposition comes from a place of wanting to solve the problem. And on the face of it, I'm happy to see that people care about this issue. But the town and village, as a reminder, have way more flexibility in raising taxes. They do not have to go to the public. They do not to vote for this. You're not even close to being the biggest beneficiary of first responders. The university actually is. Think of the proposing that individual property owners are responsible for a school tax increase so the university can continue to benefit from a volunteer fire department. If you really want to help with volunteerism for first responders, let me throw some proposals out. Why don't you use LAC to build consensus with our other taxing jurisdictions and school districts, and work with the Benjamin Center to highlight issues with how we tax and the impacts on local governments and the ability to sustain services. Ask or support the town in developing action plans to actually address and hold accountable that we have a functioning fire department.
or work with our high school and middle school health and civics teachers on programs and engage with our local first responders and provide ways for kids to be engaged and excited to volunteer for these organizations, if of course this is not already being done. In the end, I want solutions that support emergency personnel, but I want them to be equitable, and I want the solutions to work. You asked no questions of the solution, you demanded no evidence that this will work, you demanded no equity in the solution for volunteers themselves. And for that exact reason, I encourage you to focus your energy and time solving school district issues that you both have the data to understand and the power to solve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you for your comment. This brings us to item 7, the superintendent's update.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to start off by recognizing a school employee who passed away this past week, Darlene Hallwick, a bus driver for the district, had worked on and off for several years. She was a sub very recently, and most recently, just in December, we appointed her to a full-time run. She passed away over the weekend, so we really want to just tell the family and all those who worked with her that we're very sorry. We appreciate all that she did for the district, and it's quite a tragedy, so we're very sorry. And our thoughts go out to her husband, Mark, and the family. So thank you. I want to make sure we said that. And I also want to recognize all the people who stepped up the last few days and worked and made sure Falls Central School continued functioning, even though there was some rough times, especially the transportation department, who obviously was most affected. We really appreciate them keeping things going, coming into work and doing the job, even though it was very difficult. So thank you. The next item that I have is the new house, the former district office. Last time we were together, I mentioned to you that the Colombo group was using that residence, and so I've spoken with them on your direction, and they'll be moving out. They needed an extra week. They called the other day, so they will be out by February 3rd, which is Friday. And for the extra week, they said they would make a $250 donation to pay for their time in the district office for the last week. So thank Colombo Group for working with us and for their donation, which we will be happy to accept. Also, we talked about how we could move forward with doing something with the district office. Some of you asked for information on what we could do to get it back to its former useful state, and then others were interested in what it would cost to demolish it. So we reached out to CPL, and CPL has given us a quote, and I'll pass that out to you now so you can take a quick look at it. It's short. There you go. There's 2 for you. Pass them on down. So CPL is willing to do 2 things for us. Figure out the scope of the work and associated costs with repairing the building to a usable condition, and the scope of work and associated costs to demolish the building. So we'd love to know both of those things, and in addition, we would have them help us write an RFP that we can put out to find out who could demolish the building for the lowest price. And asbestos abatement is part of this. So they would make sure that they came up with kind of the 2 ways of doing it. One way is to do the abatement first and then knock it down, if that's even possible, because it's quite possible the district office is not in a state where you could have people doing, and they're doing asbestos abatement. And then the other option is to just knock it down, but then you have to treat all of the debris as possible asbestos. So they'll help us figure out which was perhaps the best way to do it, and help us write an RFP. So if you approve this proposal on their part to do this work for us for $4,200, and it will take them about a month, if you approve this proposal, then we will, as soon as we get the information, we'll present it to you, and we will also go out for an RFP. So I would ask you to consider accepting CPL's fee proposal.
Should I make a motion for it so we can discuss it? Yeah. So can I have a motion to accept the proposal for CPL?
Second.
Discussion?
Thank you for getting this. I think it's a great idea.
I think it's a great idea. I already have visions. I'm like, if we could restore that building, like for a certain amount of money, there's just extra space to do things. You know, classrooms, whatever.
I think
Good
it's
stuff.
information.
Yeah, good
Um,
information to have.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great.
We've been talking a bit about the UPK program and how best to finance it, how best to expand it if possible. We recognize the fact that only 16 district students were able to attend our pre-K program, and it's a great program. We wish everybody in the district could attend it. But of course, we have to work within the means that we have. We did apply for an expanded UPK grant, and we got a little bit of information this past week that I want to share with you. But first, I thought I would share with you, think of this as a little precursor to our budget presentation, which we'll have our first budget presentation on the 15th. But here's a little financial information about the pre-K. So we do have a pre-K grant, but I want to dispel a UPK grant, it's a pre-K, but I want to kind of dispel the myth that the UPK grant pays for the pre-K. So if you look at these numbers, if you take the salary and benefits of the teacher and the salary and benefits of the aide, both will likely be in that room next year, your cost is pretty significant, $189,000 plus $53,000. As far as what money do we get? Well, we get $5,400 for every student. So this year we have 16 students. The maximum that you can have is 18 in a UPK room. So I would suggest that next year we expand from 16 to 18, which will give you a little over $11,000 more. But the bottom line is, with the expected salary increases next year and with the revenue that we think we'll get, the district is still paying $145,512. So we love the pre-K program and we want it to continue, but realize that it is a cost to the district. Now we can fit this money into, likely we can fit this money into the one of the federal stimulus grants again for another year. And that's good news. The bad news is a year from now or then we'll have to figure out how to pay for this with the general fund, because I don't believe anybody would want to see that program go away. We did meet with a representative from Senator Skofis's office the other day. A couple of you were on this meeting, and I'll just give you the highlights of the information we got from the Senator's office, which will explain a little bit the pre-K grant. So it's kind of the thought that we didn't get an expansion grant. I guess that's true, but there's kind of a reason for that. So when we got our original grant in 2021, 2022, we were given 43 slots. And then in 2022, 2023, we were given 23 more slots. So that's a bunch of slots. That's 64 slots. I don't think the math is right in this letter that she sent me. 21 slots? Okay, so we have 64 slots. And we're going to use 18 next year. So that leaves you plenty of space for other people to go. And we wish that we could create 3 pre-K rooms. But again, every time we create a pre-K room, it costs us $145,000. So what we need to do, and I believe you tried this last time around, is to do an RFP for a community organization. If we can find a community organization who can instruct the children for $5,400 a piece, then that would be a wonderful thing. If we can't find community organizations that can do it for $5,400 a piece, then we hope that they can be close and maybe we can find a way to support it. But if it's not close to $5,400, it's going to be very difficult for you to afford to expand the pre-K program at this time. But we should definitely look. So I would suggest to you that as soon as possible, we put an RFP to community groups and to see if they would be interested in having running 1 or 2 pre-K classrooms. And if they have a facility in which to do that, that's great. But if not, I think that we would be well served to take some of our space in Bouzine and put them in there. We can help them, we can feed them, we can.
Oh, that's a great, have give space to the community-based groups to provide, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Linda, do you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think one thing that we talked about was if we were able to find a community partner, then we could apply for one of the new expansion grants down the road, and the new expansion grant reimbursement rate is $10,000 a student, which with a certified teacher in the classroom, which would go a long way to helping to close the gap.
Do you remember, Bianca, or anybody from last year when we did send out RFPs? We got two.
We got two responses, and what had happened is they were not able to get their facilities up to the standards that were required by the time it was needed for them to actually open up.
So did they say, Deb, that, do they give like a price point where they could,
No, they didn't, but the $5,400 was not part of our discussions, and they never really stressed that that wasn't enough money.
Okay.
So that's the district still does have to provide support to these programs, right, in terms of oversight and professional development. So there will be a cost to the district, and regardless. But I love the idea that if it's in the buildings,
makes it much easier.
Well, it was also clear in the meeting, if 5,400 is not enough, the district has to provide the difference.
Right.
And I guess I'm just curious, would you say, like, ballparking the numbers, is like $220,000 per class basically? Is that is that a high costing program? Is that the middle of the road? Right, if we add the grant money and the cost of the district, if it costs the district $145,000, I mean, I know there's the grant money, but so we're essentially like the class, I'm not asking the question very well, I'm just trying to understand in terms of.
We have certain restrictions that require how much this program is going to cost us.
Right.
And those restrictions make it a pretty expensive endeavor. Worth the money? Absolutely, but expensive. And if we had lots and lots of money, we'd go with the 3. So what we're looking for is somebody who can do it cheaper than we can.
I think that's how most school districts do it, is with community partners. I think when last year we were looking into it, that's how other districts were doing it. There were more community-based organizations that are doing things like this. So.
Yeah. Well, so we will get some RFPs out and see if we can expand.
Great. That sounds great.
The next thing on my list is the ESSA accountability status. And we've got some new information from the state. And we're going to let Linda help with this one. Welcome, Dr. Linda Orr-Marks.
Thank you. So we did just get this information last week. This is the preliminary ESSA accountability status for 22-23. And New Paltz has been identified as a target district. The middle school is the targeted support and improvement school within the district. And specifically, you don't need to read this all right now, but if you have any questions, I'm also happy to answer them. But specifically, in ESSA accountability, they look at subgroup performance, and they're looking particularly at how subgroup performance has improved over the course of time. There's a lot of challenges in thinking about accountability status for this year because of the last few years of very interrupted state assessment data. But basically what they do, we were targeted for 2 areas. One is the weighted average achievement performance index, and the other is the core subject performance index. And basically what they do is they take all of the assessments, the ELA, the math, and the science assessments, and they look at how many students, particularly in the weighted average achievement performance index, they look at how many students were supposed to take it, and they take 95% of them. And then that's your denominator, right? So we had fewer than 95% of our students take the test, but we still have 95% of the total that are added there. They also, just to note, they have an N minimum number of students that have to be in that subgroup to count, and the number is 30. When you look at our state assessment results, however, we had 15 black students take the math, we had 16 take the ELA, and 16 take the science, and what they do is they add them all up to get to the N of 30. So we're over the N of 30. Steve and I put in an appeal last week to say that we just disagreed with this, because the last time that we had a potential target subgroup was in 2018-19, and that was for Hispanic students in the middle school. So we're not quite sure how they came up with a potential designation for black students in the 21-22 school year. Any questions? We have no idea how long the appeal will take either.
What does LSI stand for?
That is a great question. None of the state documents, it's local support and improvement.
Okay.
So that used to be the GS, good standing, and then they changed the, as they do. Any other questions? All right, we'll keep you posted as we go.
Thanks so much.
And the next item is we'd like to consider a discussion, or give you a chance to discuss screening tools for accountability in 3 through 8, K through 8, whatever we want to do. We lack data in some respects, and so I would let Linda lead off this discussion as well.
Sure. So just thinking about our RTI plan and thinking about state regulations and best practices around RTI, one thing that we are missing in the district is a universal screening assessment for K-8 students, and thinking about that being a normed assessment would be important, so it would give us some data as to how our students can compare to other students. I don't think either of us is necessarily wed to any particular instrument, but we feel strongly that that an instrument would be necessary. The other thing to note is that when you think about a universal screener, you really want something that is not as labor intensive as some of the running records and types of things that we do now, because it should be given to all students and not just students that you maybe anticipate or think are struggling. And so thinking about that component. There are some assessment programs that allow for adaptive assessment, which can be a real benefit. So what will happen is as the student is taking the test, it adapts to the level that they're on. So that gives more fine-grained understanding of the skills that students have mastered and skills that students may still be struggling with.
Assume you've had this discussion before, because you already have $65,000 in the federal grant for a tool.
We really haven't had a discussion, so it was brought up years ago and the board was opposed to it, mainly because we hadn't had a discussion. I know I have concerns that I've probably sent out to everyone ad nauseum. But to me, the concern is not, I think everyone here agrees we need data. We really need data. It's very badly needed. My personal concern is with web-based screeners because of the data privacy, the data collection. It's more time for students on screens. Are we going to tell parents that the data is not completely secure? And what if they're opposed to that? If we give parents the opportunity to opt out, is the data really valuable then? We're just looking at this designations, this is all because of opt-out, which I fully support. And it's hard for me to parse out my experience as an educator and then my role as a board member, but I do wonder if we're teaching children math with pencil and paper, and then we are assessing them on a computer screen, what is the carryover there? And are we ready to make that leap? I think we have to have that conversation about what's the district's vision of how technology should be used, how much time kids are on screens. Is this going to dovetail into now we're having, a lot of these programs will give a prescription. They also sell their products. So, you scored this on iReady or NWEA, we recommend you do this many minutes of this program. I know a lot of districts are using web-based instructional programs. Is this going to lead to an increase in that? I think we really need to have those conversations.
If I may address a couple of those questions. So I can say that with the state requiring a full move to CBT testing, computer-based testing, those are real concerns, right? And that's a concern I've had since we were in that space, right? And in my previous district, we had been full CBT since the very beginning. And so the question always becomes, right, are we assessing a student's ability to write? Or are we assessing a student's ability to type, right? And so like you really have to think very carefully about the deliberate nature of teaching those skills. I can tell you that, the equations editor on the 3A assessments, it takes a minute, right? Well, yeah, but there's lots of ways to integrate it into your instruction. And, I can tell you too that like at the college level, that, that's a requirement, like that kids in science and math. No, for sure. And and I think it's more about like how are we deliberate about building this capacity in students. I can't speak to other districts, but I do know that in my own experience, using some of the more adaptive web-based programs like iReady or MAP, you don't need to do anything product-wise unless you choose to, right? And so that you can look at the data in and of itself and looking at the skills that may be deficits or challenges for students, and then think about what ways are you going to intervene. So, for example, in my previous district, we used NWEA. We were able to identify broadly, right? Like we had cut scores, and we could identify broadly what students that could benefit from additional benchmark assessment in some of those reading skills, right? And so that we could bring in other assessments to say, okay, can we fine tune this? And then what type of interventions were we going to use? And mostly we used Orton-Gillingham approach to address that. So I don't think that I understand what you're saying about it being a slippery slope, but it's not necessarily one that we have to go down.
My other concern is that we have a program that does provide a paper form, because there are students with IEPs who have paper tests in their IEP who don't do well with this kind of interface. So I just wonder, how accommodations, just from my experience giving these tests, the accommodations now are you have tests read aloud. Well, if we're not intentional about how we write IEPs, now students are responsible for pressing the speaker button and having the computer voice read it to you, which is very different and hard to monitor. So I just think those are, and obviously I think you would be thinking about that.
Yep,
but I just,
absolutely.
And I think it's a problem too with the computer-based testing that in a few years paper tests are not going to be available at all, even for students who have that on their IEPs. So I have a real issue, I see what you're saying. I still have these concerns, especially with the student data privacy. Doing a deep dive into it, the more data sets that are out there about students, the easier it is to reconstitute, the data is anonymous, but the more data sets that are out there, you can put it back together. So I think we also have to think about how many different web-based programs are we using? What kind of data is it collecting, because it is a risk. And how do we go about letting families know about that risk? What do we do if they don't want their kids to take it? It's really different when you're putting student data into these programs. These are for-profit companies. They're not, nonprofits, and they're getting student data. So,
right. But I think the time's come that we have to move forward with something. We can't just, nothing's going to be perfect. It doesn't sound like any of these web-based providers are going to be perfect. But we have to move forward. Linda, I have a question for you about iReady. Are most schools using that program?
I would say it's a mix in New York State.
Okay.
Like you see a lot of NWEA, iReady, and STAR assessments. The same.
My school has switched from STAR to iReady, my previous school.
Okay.
STAR to iReady, and happy with both. You're right, none of them are perfect, but
right.
They are all subject to Education Law 2D, so they all have security clearances that have been cleared to be used by our district.
As you can see in my manifesto, there's a lot of loopholes for that, and
there's going to be with every single
unless
thing.
you use pencil and paper assessments.
Well, and the reality is that Google wouldn't sign a Law 2D. and we're a Google district, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, there are, I mean, I don't know what, I have to do a deeper dive into iReady. I know that NWA doesn't keep data more, 3 years is the most they keep data. And then the district has to figure out a way to house it so that they have the historical data that's available. So, you know, we can look into what other options are available as well.
Yeah, because the last time this was brought up, I know a lot of teachers came forward, they weren't comfortable with iReady, and, you know, I don't know in that time span if it's changed at all, because this was like a few years ago. You know, but I just think the time, you know, we're desperate for data here, and we have to move forward with something, so maybe we can take a look at the 3 that you suggested, or the ones that are most used in districts, and do a deep dive into those and pick one, because we really need to put this at the forefront, I think.
I think it also matters if we're talking about using this in K-2, because as someone who gives these tests, I can tell you there's 45 to 50 questions on the NWA at the kindergarten level. And I do not think it's developmentally appropriate, and I think that that's another thing we have to talk about if we want to put 5, 6, and 7-year-olds on web-based screeners. I think it's a different conversation when you're talking about 3 through 5 or 3 through 8.
And I think other districts are doing that.
They are.
Well, I would propose that we get together a little group and get some teachers and some administrators and try and make some recommendations with the understanding that we must do something.
I agree.
I agree. And I think especially, like you were saying, Teresa and Bianca, I mean, I think the world has changed so much in the last few years, and academically, you know, the educational impact of the remote schooling and the, you know, like there's no child who's not been impacted by that. And I think I love the idea of a committee where it's a joint decision and there's different perspectives, because we do need to know where our students are. It's our job as the board to know student achievement, and you know, given the impact of the last few years, you know, I see it at home with my own children, I see it, you know, we just need to know. So I love the idea of having it be a group decision with different perspectives, so that we can work around and make the best decisions with some of the real issues Bianca's bringing up, but, you know, with the collective, we need to know where our students are so that we can plan interventions to support the areas in which they're lacking due to the last few years.
Right.
And I also just want to put out there, educators figured out ways in districts to figure out where their students were before we had web-based screeners. So I just, you know, want to point out that it's not the only option. You know, the idea just because other districts are doing it and it's become the norm doesn't always mean it's the best practice.
It's also only a piece of the puzzle. I mean, this information will be helpful. It will not replace teacher perspectives on how students are.
Right. Yeah, I think the committee's a great idea.
Okay, we'll make it happen. I think I'm done.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, Linda. All right, so this brings us to the board committee reports. We have 2 sections that seem to overlap, but one is the committee report from Glenn and the policy committee, and then the other one is the first read, the second read and the first read, 9.1 and 9.2, and they overlap a little bit. So I don't know what you want to share.
I'll just do the report out while we did the policy committee.
Okay.
And then we'll just do the other stuff.
Perfect.
So we went on Monday to make up for the snow day we had. We discussed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 policies. We discussed the sports and athletic program policy. We discussed that the school volunteers, that was the circle back, which we had previously discussed that policy at the last board meeting. We also discussed policy 3411, which is the prohibition of weapons on school grounds. Discussed the Title IX, the sexual discrimination policy, the diversity, equity, and inclusion in the district, as well as emergency school closings, extraordinary circumstances policy, and the New Paltz School District organizational chart. Those are policies we discussed in the committee meeting. Some of the policies you'll see are coming up for a first read, some are not. some of we had to make additional changes to. Particularly the sports and athletic program, we need to incorporate some changes that we saw from a BOCES policy. Was that from the Erie's BOCES?
Erie
About
one.
Erie 1 about booster clubs and Title IX. But we discussed this quite a bit. So currently, we're not in favor of changing anything in the existing policy. We're just interested in adding some of the things onto the Title IX and the booster clubs. So the board can decide if they want to make any changes to that. That's going to come out of facilities without making any changes to the current testing up policy. There was also a couple policies that are not on the agenda. We felt we're in the process of doing some research and adding some things to the diversity, equity, and inclusion in the district, as well as I think the Title IX policy. Is that on the? Yeah, that was it. So the other policies are up for a first read.
Thank you, Glenn. So that brings us to the second read. We have one policy up for second read. That's policy 3150, the school volunteers. And we want to talk about what the change, the new wording.
So the school volunteers, basically, I believe the changes were made previously at the last meeting, and the only thing we discussed about that is Raptor being used, and Raptor is being used. So we haven't made any additional changes, so that can come back.
So the copy in here is all volunteers must utilize the visitor management system and state the purpose of their visit each and every time they volunteer.
Correct.
Which is great.
While scratching the
application.
Yeah, the application and
right.
You know, having this list of approved volunteers, which we discovered all buildings were doing, you know, their own version of it. So I think this is.
Yeah, probably I should make a motion and then we discuss, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
By passing that. So can I have a motion to have a second read of the policy?
So moved.
Second. Yeah, I think this is fine, this the way it is. I read it, I think it was what we had discussed last time, so
yeah, covers it.
we can we
And
move to like,
motion to
yeah,
approve.
I mean, yeah, unless anybody else has any.
No, I think that's good. So can I have a motion to approve the policy?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Fantastic, thank you. So we have the first read, item 9.2 of 4 different policies. We'll go through one by one. So we have policy 3411, which is the prohibition of weapons on school grounds.
We made no changes to that policy. Pretty
Right.
self-explanatory.
Yeah, right, yeah. Exactly.
Are you guys okay with making a motion to pass it, waive the first read? Move it forward? All right, so can I have a motion to approve the policy without any changes?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, so then we have policy number 3510, which is the emergency school closings.
This is basically a pretty quick policy. It's self-explanatory, talks about the superintendent being able to close schools. We didn't make any changes to the policy.
Great.
I have a question on it. So this has come up in the past. So when we close schools, I think it said, you know, all these sports are closed, everything's closed. Are the Board of Ed meetings or are committee meetings also closed?
It should be, yes. The building,
Right?
the building is
Because-
closed in its entirety throughout the day.
Okay, so that, because I know
Unless-
there was some questions like, oh, are we still having a, you know, facilities meeting because, you know, if the weather gets better. You know, I was under the impression that once we're closed, we are closed.
Correct.
And there are
Unless there is
nothing
some
else.
unusual reason not related to weather that we closed for, that can happen.
Okay.
And if we closed on that and weather was not an issue, you might be able to make an argument that we'd still have something. But in general cases, we are closed, we're closed, everything's closed. throughout the
Okay.
day.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that, so.
So, can I have a motion to approve, to waive the first read and approve policy 3510?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. And then we have policy 3520, which is the extraordinary circumstances policy.
This is a policy which basically says that the school board and the superintendent can make any policies that we have to make for emergency reasons. It allows us to do that.
And this was in place before and it's going through no
Correct.
changes.
We have made no changes to the policy.
All right. So can I have a motion to waive the first read and approve policy 3520 without any changes?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. And that brings us to the policy 4212, which is the Newport Central School District organizational chart. Is there anything?
Yeah, there's a chart for the organizational admin of the district, and there were some changes made to this, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, the changes were not significant. There was a administrator who was previously aligned with Duzine and Lenape. So that administrator no longer works here, and that position no longer exists, so that was removed. And we had the Director of Student Support Services and Community Engagement was added, and you'll see that block underneath the Deputy Superintendent.
Okay.
I don't think there were any other changes.
Okay. All right, so does this one go to a second read, or?
I think we can pass this
We can
one.
pass this. All right, so can I have a motion to?
If everybody's comfortable with that.
Waive the first read and approve policy 4212.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you to the policy committee for moving things along. That's great. We have item 10.1. Can I have a motion to accept the minutes for the meeting of January 18th, 2023?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Financial reports, we have the 4 different reports. Can I have a motion to accept the treasury reports for December 2022?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 12.1, can I have a motion to approve items of the personnel consent agenda, item 13.1 through 14.3?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Item 15.1, can I have a motion to approve the special education recommendations and student placements?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
This brings us to 16, which is new business. Item 16.1 is the determination of health and welfare tuition, 22-23. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 16.2, acceptance of the donation from the Newport Central School District Foundation for Student Enhancement. Do you want to say something about this?
I think we can read it if you like.
Yeah.
Read it.
Yeah, it's a donation of $500 awarded to the middle school for
High school.
No, high school. That's high school for the library cozy corner. A low-tech space for students to relax and enjoy low-stress activities. Sounds fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so
Yes,
much.
thank you so much.
Can I have a motion to approve the
So
donation?
moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And 16.3, we have also another donation, and this is from SP Industries. Can I have a motion to accept the donation?
What is it?
Oh, for various school supplies.
Or pencils, crayons.
Yeah.
Backpacks, markers,
markers.
yeah, all sorts of stuff.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This brings us to the second public comment. Do we have anyone signed up? That's the first one. Okay. Great, so this brings us to
We do have a customer.
I didn't know I had to sign up for it, so I apologize.
Okay.
I don't do this often. Well, I'll say I haven't done it often, but I might do it more often. Okay, I'm going to be like a kid and use my phone. Good evening, folks. My name is Melissa Gruber-LaPolte. I'm a resident of the New Paltz School District, and I'm also an employee of the school district. I moved to New Paltz in 1996, and I began coaching swimming for the Hawks Swim Club in the fall of 1996. I've been working as a 7th and 8th grade health education teacher here since 1999, which many of you may think that was a long time ago, but I'd still like to think maybe it wasn't that long ago that I've been here. But okay, but anyway. So I've been coaching both the boys and girls swim team, varsity swim team since 1999 also, and I've also been coaching the town rec team over the years. So swimming has been a part of my life. And this is where I could get all emotional again, but swimming has been part of my life since I was 6 years old. It has never left my world since my mom and dad put me on a swim team because they didn't know how to teach me how to swim. They wanted somebody to teach me how to swim, and my sister how to swim. And we competed in high school teams. We both competed collegiately, and then now here I am, and now I teach kids how to swim in the summer, and I coach them all throughout the year. When I moved here, I was flabbergasted at the fact that school districts didn't have pools down here, because where I grew up in Binghamton area, almost every school district did, and I couldn't believe it, that they didn't have one here. We started learning how to swim also. Kids would go to school in their PE classes for 2 weeks every year, beginning in 1st grade until 8th grade, and then you could take high school elective swim classes through that. One of my points is, I would like to ask the district to really start to look at having a pool in this district. I feel that even though there's been a lot of kids that have come through the swim program in the summer, and a lot of kids who have come through in the high school team and have done really well, we've had state champions, we've had section champions, we've had it all, but unless kids are given the opportunity to learn how to swim, they don't always get to learn how to swim. It's been my history in this town that for the most part, unless kids' parents or whoever will pay for them to learn how to swim, they don't get to always learn how to swim. I've had several kids come on my team, on the high school team over the years, who didn't do swim lessons, and we taught them how to swim, and they have been some of the best success stories possible. I would like to see that we extend that to more and more kids. Now I know a pool is very expensive, that's why people don't build them, I get it, but I'm gonna really ask that we really try to figure out how to do that. SUNY New Paltz has been great over the years in hosting us, but anybody who's in the swim community knows that it's getting harder and harder for the public to have access there. And that became glaringly apparent during COVID, during the time of COVID, when we had to find a place to be able to keep kids swimming. And we know for a fact their mental and their emotional health and wellness were absolutely impacted by this. And when they got to come back and swim, they didn't care if they had to wear masks. They did everything they possibly could in order to be able to continue their love. So again, I thank you for your time and your consideration, and maybe I'll be back again. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, this brings us to the final thing on our agenda. This is the discussion around the tax exemption that was presented on the last meeting. So we had asked for some information around that. I don't know if that was able to be had.
Well, we talked about what information we could get you. We talked about talking to all of the different emergency squads to see how many volunteers they had. We probably could have gotten that information, but then we wouldn't know how many of those were actually in the New Paltz district.
I spoke to the chief. So Matt Goodenow said there's about 6 people who qualify for this other ambulance.
And I think in the fire department, there's 9 in New Paltz and possibly 9 in Gardner.
And that's
not including the EMS though, right? So
well, EMS, the ambulance service in this town is separate from the fire department. there's about maybe 6 people that would qualify for this exemption. But he did say, you know, we heard that Ms. Easton spoke, made many amazing points, and I agree with many of the points that were made. The chief did say that, you know, a lot of their people are 40 or 50 years old, and he would love it for us to pass this because it might encourage people to come out and drive the ambulance. Now, as someone who was the captain of the rescue squad for a couple of years and worked for many years in the rescue squad, there are people who just drive the ambulance. So you're allowed to, you know, you get a paramedic or a couple of EMTs, and the person driving the ambulance could just be a person that passes an in-house training. And it's very often that the ambulance will roll in town because someone volunteers to just drive while the other people are in the back. So, and that, he believed it was very likely that some of these people would come out and fill this position.
I think that Allison made really incredible points that I would never have thought of, but I also don't think that they're mutually exclusive. I think that we can provide some tax relief to volunteer emergency workers while also addressing the fact that it's not sustainable to have an unpaid fire department. It's also not sustainable to have the community pay for a fire department. You know, when you look at the cost, you know, just looking at trying to find how many taxable parcels there were, it's hard to say exactly because Gardner and Esopus are not all within our district, but let's just say lowballing it. If we say there's 6,000 taxable properties, and I'm basing this on, say, 20 people who are eligible, and if you look at an assessed value of a house of about $300,000, which, you know, market value, if you're assessed at $300,000, market value is probably, what, 5 or 6. You know, and you look at that on the low end, it would cost each taxpayer or each property about $2.50. If you go on the higher end and you say, you know, if we had double the number of firefighters, or you look at higher property values, it would cost about $5 per taxpayer. And if you looked at the Benjamin Center report, if we have a paid fire department, you're talking about, you know, they talk about anywhere from a 25 to 41% increase in property taxes. So to me, just even on a moral and ethical level, I think all of those points that Allison made, I definitely need to spend more time thinking about those because they were really interesting, but I think we have to have both things at the same time.
I agree.
I think we have to fight for a different system, but also that's not going to happen overnight. Mm-hmm. And we need, if it increases the volunteer fire, you know, firefighters, emergency workers by 2 volunteers, by, you know, 4 volunteers.
No, I agree.
I think that's worth it.
I love the points you made, especially about EMS and fire department going into the schools to drum up support, because there are a lot of kids do volunteer. Maybe you get those into the high school.
And how do you equitably also
they get
thank people who are not
that.
homeowners or property owners? You know what I mean? That's really
but I'm gonna say again, a lot of people move here from other places and they're oblivious to what happens in town. And it would be nice to see some of the new homeowners coming into this district, participating in the community and start giving back to the community they love because they live here. People are carrying it, you know, and these are people that are on the fire department and the ambulance that have been doing it for 20, 30 years. You know, you get some new members and they do, it's, you know, it's a fulfilling job, but I think that maybe it's not, a lot of folks that move here come from places where they don't have to worry about this because they have paid stuff. And I don't know if a lot of them know, so I don't know if there could be some sort of community outreach. I don't know. There's lots of good ideas she had. But I agree with you, at the end of the day, I would support this.
But just to be clear, we don't have a resolution on the table.
No, we don't.
So the first step would be to even develop a resolution, and then we would have to have a public hearing, and then we would have to adopt it. So, you know, I think really the question is, do we want to look at creating a resolution? And, you know, also it doesn't have to be 10%, it's up to 10%. It doesn't have to be 2 years, it could be someone who's served 2 to 5 years. So there's a range of options that could be hammered out in a resolution.
I was under the impression that we didn't need to even decide this, that it was already decided by the town and village.
The town, the village, and the school board can each decide. So if the town and the village and the school district all decide that, it combines.
So,
Okay.
so we're just deciding for the portion of
School taxes.
school taxes.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
That's it,
Okay,
yeah.
I misunderstood.
We're totally
Okay.
independent of what they do.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So, I mean, I personally don't understand exactly how this works or what sort of financial impact. I mean, I know you did kind of the numbers, but, you know, as far as like, you know, I don't feel like the district really has access to the right information to be able to answer questions as to, you know, would it work, is it working, how do we check, you know, if we make this, decision of how the taxes are allocated, or how, you know, how they're redistributed, how do we know if it's worked or not, and can we reverse it at some point based on information we've gotten? We have no way of tracking this. So for me, it would be really important to get more information. I really don't feel like I have enough information to make a decision on this.
I agree. So do we really need to go through that process, like create a resolution, have a public hearing
Yeah, I
about
think
it?
there has to be.
Yeah.
one.
So
Yeah.
I think we would be voting tonight whether or not we wanted to create a resolution.
Well, there's no vote, because there's no, I mean, we could decide, and then the resolution would be made, and then we vote on the resolution.
And we could make a resolution and, you know, we might not do it.
We
That's okay.
also, I sent a link earlier, and, you know, my apologies for not sending it sooner, but I had been talking about, we had, because of the way things were allocated last year, we had Gardner, some outreach from senior citizens in Gardner who were affected by the tax increase that Gardner largely footed, and, you know, seniors that are on a fixed income, and they had been asking about increasing their exemption. So I did a little digging. Again, this is a super last minute, and you can find more information because that was part of the discussion that I think is worth having alongside this, because we have approved in our reorg meeting in July, we already have exemptions for seniors, for disability, for those with disabilities, and for veterans. The seniors and the ones with disabilities, there's a percentage rate based on income, and the veterans, it's based on type of service. And, you know, I looked at the laws, and it looks, and this is where I have to find more information, it looks like we are already at max. Like, we can't actually increase the rates for seniors that might be, you know, being priced out at this point with all the inflation. There's no, like, we can't.
No more
raise-
assistance.
Yeah, we can't do a cost of living increase. It looks like, so I will find out. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that tonight. But I think it's important to consider. You know, like, I think for our district to know how many people are applying for these exemptions, how much money in total is already being redistributed, and how much might be added to that, changes the amounts that we are now redistributing.
I don't think there's any way to know the exact amount, because you don't even know that every person who's eligible is going to apply.
Right.
So I would like to make a motion that we develop a resolution, and then discuss it. So I make a motion to develop a resolution for future discussion.
I'll second.
I'll move it.
So we could make.
So moved, seconded.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, no discussion.
I thought you were moving.
Oh, I mean, yes. That confused me.
I'm sorry.
So we could come up with a format similar to what you're doing for veterans and senior citizens to present.
Before we do that, we should talk about what's going to be in this resolution. Are we talking about, this would only be for New Paltz firefighters and New Paltz ambulance work?
It would be
Does
for
this
everyone in
district
the school
cover-
district.
Municipalities in the district.
Anybody in your district, in your school district.
Yeah, which is many municipalities.
Right,
It
so
is,
technically it
but
would
it's not in talking to, you know, town and village officials, there's maybe at most, and that's a high estimate, 30 people who are eligible. If you look at fire department, Gardner, New Paltz, and you look at EMS.
Right, so
Quite a lot of people.
Right, so if you have someone who lives in, Esopus, right, they're part of, and they're in their fire department but live in our district, I believe that still counts.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
they're-
anybody in our
Yeah.
district.
Anyone in our district that volunteers anywhere. Right, so if you have volunteers that are.
Who has a certain number of years of service, which we can set. So the law says 2 years, but we could say 2 to 5, we had, within the resolution, that's where we have discretion, is to say how many years of service. It doesn't have to be 10%, it's up to 10%. So that's, I think, what would be in the resolution.
Yeah, I don't know the fire numbers, but I know that the ambulance, there's, I think, 12 active members that would be covered here. Some of them don't live in here or have kids here, they're not in this, because they just live somewhere else, they just come here because it's where they volunteer. And that's a decent, some of them, and then some don't own houses. So it's about, he wasn't sure, but he was like, it might be 3, 5.
It could be a sliding scale, there's a lot of ways we could.
Do the town and village already have resolutions on this?
They both have either passed it or expressed their intent to pass it.
Maybe we can get
The town had their public hearing, and I think they're gonna, the next
So-
step is they vote on it.
I just want to see what their resolution
Yeah,
says.
we have
them.
Oh, we do have it?
Yeah, so we could,
Do
we
we
could
have it?
develop a
Somebody said we
resolution
should
and then we
last.
get.
I'll look, I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Sorry,
as
go ahead.
these numbers come in, maybe it's not feasible. With the law, they can't raise the thing, that's a real concern.
But I also I don't necessarily also want to conflate exemptions for seniors, veterans, these are all, I think that we do have pre-existing exemptions for our senior citizens and our veterans. I don't necessarily see the exemption for veterans and volunteer emergency workers as I think they're both people who have risked a lot, and it's, to me, this is just I think we have to find other ways to fund this. I think that we have to find ways to make it more equitable. If you're not a homeowner, you don't reap the benefits of this. But at the same time, I think we have to do both. If you've ever had an emergency at 2, 3 in the morning, these are the people who show up. The fire department averages 2 calls a day. That's average. Some days there's more. And if you're a volunteer firefighter, you have to respond to a certain percentage of it. So you can't just sign up and be a volunteer emergency worker and you only answer like 2 calls a year. You're really in it.
So who's taking charge to write the resolution?
I'll make it or I'll find it.
And if I could ask a question, being that I have to keep the minutes?
Yep.
So far, I have a motion to develop a resolution for further future discussion. So that's not really very specific of what is actually being done.
A resolution to provide tax exemptions for first responders.
And maybe reference the law.
Yeah.
I would look and see what the village and town have passed and kind of go from that and see, because,
The copy's in the last meeting.
Ours will be a little bit different because we have many municipalities, but it's pretty much the same,
And a large piece of the pie, too.
We will bring you something to discuss.
Yeah. So if we have, let's say, a volunteer, a volunteer firefighter in Esopus, they would get that exemption through us, right?
They've been volunteering for at least 2 years and they own a home.
Right, but what about, as Glenn was saying, also, are there other, I know New Paltz Rescue Squad is one, but is there one in Highland Rescue Squad? Is there one,
Because they can volunteer anywhere, it's just if they live in the district, so we don't really know how many people in the district are volunteering.
Right, that's what I'm saying, is
Yeah.
there, you might know this answer to this, is there like a Highland Rescue Squad or no?
Well, no, I don't know exactly, but I know a lot of local towns have contracted out with mobile.
Oh, okay, I know Gardner.
So we could say that you live in the district and you volunteer in a unit that services this district. So if you live in New Paltz and let's say you volunteer for the Marlboro, whatever, I think that's something in the resolution we can say, you know, that this is for volunteers within our catchment area.
Right, right. Well, that would be unusual if you lived here, but, well, I mean, I
who knows?
guess, yeah, people, that happens, yeah.
It happens.
But I'm
I live
just-
in Esopus, I could volunteer for the Port Ewan Fire.
Yeah.
Right.
Port Ewan's not in the district.
Okay, right, okay.
And there are
Just trying to
people
get this-
volunteering on the New Paltz EMS that don't even live here.
Right.
They're just connected one way or the other, that's where they volunteer.
Okay, I think I understand it. Yeah, so I guess we'll look forward to be discussing that further. Is there a time limit that we have through the village and the town to enact this, or are they giving us like, you need to make a decision?
We're independent
Yeah,
of the village.
Oh, we're independent of it, okay.
They have nothing to do with us, and we have nothing to do with them.
The law was introduced this year and that's it.
Okay.
That's all there is.
So again, I'm gonna clarify. So it's a motion for the district to develop a resolution for tax exemptions for first responders.
Mhm.
Yes.
First responders and volunteer firefighters.
I think they're covered.
Well,
they're all, they all fall under the guise of.
Volunteer
responders.
first responders.
Yeah. The documentation that came from the town and the village said it was for volunteer firefighters and rescue squads
Yes.
specifically.
That's what I would say. 'Cause
Okay.
that's what.
So to
that's what we
develop
said.
a resolution for tax exemption for volunteer firefighters and rescue squad.
Yes, because the first responder could be
Yeah,
anybody,
that's a lot.
really.
I think the bill says first responder.
Does
but
it?
that- Yeah, but that makes more sense.
Yeah, because when I'm thinking first responders, I'm
That's a lot
thinking,
of people.
there could be other people.
Yeah.
It says volunteer firefighters and ambulance workers.
Where am I getting volunteer first responders?
That's not what this.
Oh, there says what, Andy? It says,
Oh no, volunteer firefighter and ambulance worker, partial tax exemption.
okay.
Yes.
Deb, do you have any input on this? Like, did you?
The only thing with regards to a deadline is that for applications for the upcoming year, applicants have to apply by March 1st. So if we don't pass this by March 1st, they won't get the tax exemption until the following year.
Okay. I mean, do you have any sense of like the financial impact on the?
No, and I tried talking to the county about it, and they just can't come up with
Right.
who's eligible, who would own a home, it has to be your primary residence, things like that.
Okay.
And the law references it as volunteer firefighter and ambulance worker partial tax exemption.
Yeah. Okay. So if we're all, I think we're good. So
We need to vote that, right?
Yeah.
It's a motion.
Oh, yeah, okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Who made the motion and who second?
Yeah,
Bianca.
who did I second?
Brian.
So I make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All
Second.
in favor?
Aye.